In today's video, we're going to talk about some little known watercolour secrets that you might not have come across before. So the first little known secret I have for you is that hot press paper not only is harder to work on than ordinary standard surface watercolour paper, but it won't make your paint look as good either. So what's the point of it? Let's talk about it. So I've got some ordinary cold press or knot paper here, and it's got tiny little bumps. Now these bumps allow the pigment to spread evenly. They help prevent puddles forming, and because the paper surface is uneven, we're going to get more light reflection and the colours are going to look richer and you're going to be able to see more of the individual pigments. Now let's look at the hot press paper. It's much smoother. What this means is that the paint is less evenly spread out. That means it's far more likely to sit and dry in puddles. Where we have puddles with watercolour paint, we have uneven drying. Now, we can do that on purpose to make some special effects, but generally speaking, it's not the best thing. We don't want that happening all the time. You can already see here the paper has bowed a little bit, and the pigment, rather than being spread out and looking textured and beautiful, it's sitting here. As this area dries, this will remain wet, and then we'll get a back run or a drying line happening. And as the paper dries, this one will start to look duller than this one over here. So what's the point of hot press paper, and when would I use it? I use it when I have to use it. In other words, when I need a smooth surface. And that's not for standard watercolour painting. That's not even for line and wash. You'll find that you can do most pen work very accurately and easily. I used to do professional commercial illustration with liner pens on paper just like this one here. But if, for example, I wanted to add soft pastel or charcoal, which really don't sit well on top of cold press paper like this, if I wanted to add those on top of my watercolour paper, or something that had a real advantage to being dead flat, like I was going to do some collage, then that's when I would choose my hot press paper. But the rest of the time, you're better off avoiding it. My next little known watercolour secret is that very watery paint, in other words, paint with a high amount of water and less pigment, is harder to paint with. So have you ever tried to be neat when you've got very watery paint and you've found that not only is it hard to paint in the right place, but you also get little splatters appearing? I've got a tiny one over here. Now, it's not your imagination. Paint that's thicker and is mixed with less water is easier to control, and this is because of surface tension. Whenever you mix things into water, you're lowering the surface tension, which means that you can manipulate the paint and push it around. It'll stay where you put it. When you've got watery paint like this, you're fighting against surface tension. Now, that's all very well, but we can't always use thick, strong paint like this. Sometimes with watercolour, we do need to put a lot of water in to get a nice pale colour. So what's the answer? The answer is just to be aware of the fact that you're likely to get more splatters and have a harder time painting neatly. So don't have too much paint on your brush in one go, and move the brush a little more slowly. That will reduce any splattering. My next little known watercolour secret is that red colours and colours with red in, such as purple and orange, bleed more easily. Now, this is completely anecdotal. I have absolutely no proof of this one. I want you to let me know in the comments if you've found this as well. I've just found that when I go up to the edge of areas that have red in, and it's not just because it's a strong colour, it doesn't seem to happen, for instance, with blues. I've just found that when I paint up to red areas, I feel like there's more bleeding happens, both internally, i.e. the green will bleed in, but also that the red or the purple can start to bleed outwards, and it's much harder to get a crisp edge. Now, we should always be working light to dark, but sometimes if we have a situation like this where there's maybe a red flower and a light green background and they're painted separately, you can kind of think, well, it doesn't really matter which one I do first. I could do the background first, or I could do the flowers first. I would suggest that you always put the red in last. As I said, it's only anecdotal, but I've just noticed with reds and purples, we get an awful lot of bleeding from that strong colour with red in. My next little known watercolour secret is that when it comes to painting moving water, candle wax, a household candle like this one, works much better than masking fluid. So I've put some masking fluid on this side of my paper. Don't worry if you can't see, it'll appear in just a moment. And I can apply some paint, and you can see where I've attempted to make some wave shapes. Now let's try my second method with the candle wax. All I'm going to do is to rub it across the paper and also try and get some sort of wave type shapes. Now you may feel that it's completely invisible, but when you're doing this yourself, you'll be able to tip paper up to the light and you will actually be able to see where you're working. And I advise practicing this before you have a go on a painting. Now this one will appear straight away. Of course, we're going to need to take the masking fluid off. Make sure you watch until the end of the video. I'm going to remove this masking fluid right at the end when the paint's dry, and you can tell me which one you think has worked the best. My next little known watercolour secret is that same pigment number does not mean the same colour. So I have some red oxide pigment here. Not only are they the same pigment number, but they're actually from the same batch because these are manufacturer's samples which were sent to me. So what's the difference between these if they're from the same batch? I think you can already see a bit of colour difference. Let's swatch them. So here is one. Remember, this is the exact same pigment, and I'll attempt to use about the same amount of water. And here's the other. Now, if you have a look at these little handwritten lids, they've both got PR, that's pigment red 101, so they're the same pigment number. But you'll notice that this one has 180 and this has 120, and they both have an M. I believe the M is for microns. Basically what it is the grind size. So it's the size at which the pigment has been prepared. Why would this make such a difference to the colour? It's because colour exists in the brain. So our brain interprets light bouncing off of a surface. Now, when you change the grind size, you change the way the light reflects, and therefore you change the colour. And that's not the only thing that can affect pigment colour. Just like diamonds, they might be the same chemical composition, but you can get them from all different countries all over the world, different sources, different qualities, and manufacturers will prepare them in different ways, not just with different grind size, but with different binders. So when you get a tube of paint and you look on the pigments on the back and you think, oh, I can just make that myself, you probably can't. That's not to say you shouldn't have a go at mixing your own colours. Another thing to remember is that a very large, well-known manufacturer like Daniel Smith or Winsor & Newton has far more money at their disposal, so they can snap up rare and high-quality pigments. Something to think about before buying on Etsy. Not that I have any problem with people hand-making small batches of paint, but I think it's good to be informed. 2/3 of you who are watching this video are not subscribed to my channel. Could I just ask you quickly if you would like to subscribe? I've got over 300 free tutorials here. Subscribing is free, as is liking this video, and my channel is fully CAD approved. Now, my next little known watercolour secret is that certain colours just don't layer well, and I'm talking about opaques or semi-opaques. So in this circle here, I have some Naples yellow, well known to be a colour with quite a lot of opacity. And here I've got some Winsor & Newton transparent yellow. And I'm going to layer with some Daniel Smith green gold, which is also quite a transparent colour. And let's try it first on the Naples yellow. Now you might notice that we're getting some lifting here, and we're getting some unevenness and some sort of redistributing of pigment. With all of the semi-opaques, there's a certain chalkiness to them and a certain thickness, shall we say, and they tend to move and go muddy when mixed with other colours. So let's try the transparent yellow now. And here with the same Daniel Smith green gold, we're getting much brighter, cleaner effects, and the underneath layer is disturbing less. Now, that's not to say that semi-opaques and opaques are bad. I really hate to hear people avoid them because they really are some of the most beautiful colours you can get. They give impact and solidity to certain areas. Here in the UK, we have a lot of rapeseed fields. I think you would call it canola oil. In the US, we call it rapeseed here in the UK. Semi-opaques like Naples yellow or nickel titanate are absolutely fabulous for getting the solidity and the yellowness of those fields. But the thing is, what you need to do with opaque colours or semi-opaque colours is to place them on your paper and pretty much leave them alone. You don't want to be using them much for mixing and layering. So how do you tell if the colour is opaque or not? You may get some information from the manufacturers, but the easiest way is simply to swatch. So I've got a black line of permanent ink here, and first of all we'll swatch the Naples yellow. Then we'll swatch, I'm not sure actually if I may have picked up quinacridone gold here rather than transparent yellow, but either way it's a transparent colour, and I think you can see straight away, and you'll need to let the sample dry, but you can see straight away that the black line is clearer on the transparent colour. It's more covered up on the semi-opaque. As I said, semi-opaques are not bad colours. If you try and leave out semi-opaques or granulating colours from your palette, you're going to miss an awful lot of beautiful colours. It's just a matter of knowing how they behave and the best uses for them. My next little known watercolour secret is that you can almost always get away with using white paint if you are splattering. So this is so useful if you're doing something like a beach or a pathway. I've got some titanium white here. Basically, you get two types of white. You get zinc white, which is sometimes called Chinese white, and you get titanium white, which is a little bit more opaque. It may well be labelled as gouache, which is opaque watercolour. And I can mix it with a little bit of something else just to knock the brightness off. And then taking a toothbrush, I can splatter and start getting a really subtle effect. If I combine this with darker paint, I'm going to get some beautiful textures. You can also use this technique with any of your semi-opaques, things like buff titanium, nickel titanate, those lovely pale yellows and buff colours. They're going to add a lot of dimension and interest to your textured pathways and beaches. No one's ever going to notice that you used any white. My next little known watercolour fact is that yellow tends to block pencil in, and this is related to what we were talking about before. It's really because many yellows are opaque or semi-opaque, and unlike other areas of the colour spectrum, we don't always have the option of swapping them out for a more transparent colour should we want one. When it comes to blues, reds, pinks, purples, we have a choice between opaques and semi-opaques. But when it comes down to particularly the cooler end of the lemon spectrum, and of course, we're bound by what natural pigments are available. Many of the colours we use are somewhat opaque or semi-opaque. So you can see I drew quite heavily here with quite a dark pencil, and I'm erasing quite hard here, and it's just not going to come off underneath that somewhat opaque paint. This is a really nice colour. This one's by Jackman's Art Materials, who I work with, and this is their cadmium yellow. Fabulous colour, isn't it? But most cadmiums are somewhat opaque. So what can we do if we're forced to work with a yellow that's a little bit opaque? And other yellows that are opaque are yellow ochre, all of the cadmiums, nickel titanate and Naples yellow. What we can do is we can reduce the amount of pencil that we use, and we can clean up before we paint. We can paint in areas. So rather than going across all of these petals, what I'll do is I'll paint a couple that aren't touching, and then I can go in, excuse this disgusting eraser, and I can get rid of the pencil lines that are in between here and here as much as I can. I can take some of that pencil out and really just reduce so I can just about see it before I go in and put my next layer on. And I'm not ending up with a whole load of pencil that's trapped underneath the paint. As with everything else, watercolour, knowledge is power. My next secret is that you can use a standard household ballpoint pen for pen and wash. You can get some amazing effects. You don't need any special kind of pen. If you want to have a go at pen and wash, you don't have to go out and buy either a dip pen or an expensive liner pen. Most ballpoint pens have permanent ink. Once you've finished your drawing, it's a good idea to blot lightly. It'll dry pretty much straight away, but we all know that sometimes pens blob. Then you're free to play around with your paint. If you haven't tried this technique, it's very freeing. Keep your washes light with plenty of water. As long as you don't go so dark that you cover up the pen, you really do have the freedom to be quite loose with your paint and to play around with different colours. Let's go back to our candle wax and masking fluid samples. Now the candle wax will just stay on my paper. The masking fluid can be removed now that the paper is dry. In all my years of teaching painting, I haven't seen anybody use masking fluid very effectively. I do sometimes combine it in small amounts with the candle wax, particularly with splattering. But if you're a beginner, you're going to find this method is going to give you much more natural looking results. Masking fluid is just too harsh and crisp edged for water. Let me know in the comments if you agree. So let me know in the comments if any of these things were new to you. Perhaps you knew some of them already. Do you have any of your own watercolor secrets to share? Perhaps I'll make a part 2. And before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in that video description. I've got lots of free stuff down there for you, including some free downloadable PDFs. Also a free watercolor rose course that you can take, as well as some comprehensive paid courses that you can take with me, including drawing and beginner's watercolor. And if you enjoyed this video, you can watch one of my most popular watercolor videos right now.